it's almost never a good thing to give your loved one who is dying a feeding tube. There are a few instances that I think it's okay, and those are usually when someone can still have a good quality of life and when the person themselves is alert and oriented and says, I want a feeding tube. Then by all means, please have one. But in general, feeding tubes at the end of life usually just cause risk for infection, aspiration pneumonias, and a lot more issues. They don't really give people nutrition like the families think they will. Now, if you're already coming onto hospice with a feeding tube, yes, we can utilize that feeding tube and give you nutrition that way. And I would say to stop or pull back on the feeding if you see high residuals or if the person starts getting a lot of aspiration pneumonias. I think the fear is always, well, if we stop feeding them through the G-tube, they're going to die of starvation. And truly, that person is dying from their terminal disease. They're not dying from starvation. And really, at the end of life, the body starts preparing itself and starts making itself not hungry, making itself not thirsty, making itself sleep more. So the person's not really having hunger pains. If anything, the feeding tube usually starts causing more issues because the person really can't tolerate what's going into their gastric system. Knowing if your loved ones would want a feeding tube or not is like the number one thing you guys should be asking each other. So talk about this topic. Let people know what you'd want if this were to happen to you, or if they needed to make a decision on whether or not to place a feeding tube. You tell your family now while you can whether you'd want that or not. So then when the time comes, they don't have this hard decision where they think they're killing you. And I always find that it's much easier to say no to a feeding tube than to place a feeding tube and then stop feeding someone. That is harder from my experience with my patients and their families. So get the facts, talk about it with your loved ones, already know what your loved ones want before it's too late. Let me know if you have any questions. I know this is a tough one.